The Wyoming wind cut across the empty plains like a warning, dry and sharp, whispering through the tall grass that something was coming. Ethan Ward didn't know what, not yet. He only knew that he was tired of running from the ashes of his past, tired of losing everything that mattered, tired of feeling like he no longer had a place in the world. But as he shoved the first fence post into the soil that morning, he felt, for the first time in years, that he was claiming something back, something that belonged to him. Then the low thunder of rotor blades rolled over the horizon, growing louder, heavier, until the entire earth vibrated beneath him. Ethan turned, stunned, as a black helicopter descended right onto his land, dust spiraling, wind screaming. Before he could understand anything, a voice blared from the aircraft, ordering him to stop immediately. And in that moment, he felt the past he had just escaped rushing back toward him like a storm. Brown Square. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that restore faith in humanity, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name. It truly helps the channel grow. Ethan had moved to Wyoming because he needed silence, real silence, the kind that made him feel like the world wasn't closing in on him anymore. After losing his construction business, after losing his father, after watching his marriage collapse under the weight of grief and bills and exhaustion, he needed a place so empty that he could finally breathe again. The small 80-acre patch he bought wasn't much, just a stretch of land bordered by hills, sagebrush, and big sky. But to Ethan, it was hope. He planned to start small, a fence, a tiny cabin, maybe some cattle someday. Anything that meant he was rebuilding instead of drowning. But he never expected his first day of fencing to turn into something out of a military movie. When the helicopter finally settled and the dust cleared, Ethan braced himself with one hand on the fence post, wondering if he was trespassing by mistake or if he had broken some law he wasn't aware of. He knew Wyoming had vast federal land sprinkled everywhere, but he had triple-checked his paperwork. The land was his. Every acre. Every inch. Still, the way the aircraft landed, assertive, commanding, made him question everything. A tall man stepped out, wearing a tactical vest, sunglasses, and a stern expression carved into stone. Ethan had seen that expression too many times before, the expression of people who believed they owned the very ground they walked on. The man approached him with deliberate steps, and the wind whipped around them as if it too was holding its breath. He told Ethan that the land ahead was restricted, that a government facility was only a few miles away, and that fencing here was not allowed. Ethan tried to stay calm, but something about the man's tone dug into old wounds. He had spent the last year rebuilding his sense of purpose, and now this stranger was telling him he couldn't even put up a fence on property he had fought so hard to buy. Ethan pulled out his documents, hands trembling slightly, and offered them to the man. The man took them, glanced, and then something changed in his face. The tension in his jaw loosened, not much, but enough for Ethan to notice. As the helicopter crew verified his ownership, Ethan felt anger, fear, and weariness rising in him. He remembered all the times he had been pushed aside, dismissed by banks, by officials, by people who thought his struggles were his failures. He remembered the day he closed the door to his father's empty house for the last time, the day his wife packed her things quietly without looking him in the eye, the day he watched everything he had built dissolve piece by piece. Wyoming was supposed to be his clean slate, and now even that seemed to be slipping out of reach. The man eventually returned his papers and apologized stiffly, explaining that a clerical error had marked a portion of Ethan's land as part of a buffer zone. Ethan wanted to be relieved. He wanted to believe the problem was solved. But something about the man's voice, the guarded look, the tension in his stance, it all suggested that this went deeper than paperwork. And Ethan felt it in his gut, this wasn't over. For the next few days, Ethan continued fencing, trying to push down the unease. The land was beautiful, rolling hills, scattered pines, open sky stretching endlessly. At night, the stars felt close enough to touch. He used those nights to remind himself why he came here. He worked hard, alone but determined. Yet every time he hammered a post into the ground, he felt eyes on him. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe not. On the fifth morning, he found tire tracks near his equipment, deep, fresh tracks he hadn't made. Someone had been there. Someone had inspected his tools. Someone had walked the perimeter of his fencing line. Ethan felt his chest tighten. The helicopter had returned twice since then, not landing, just hovering far enough away to pretend it wasn't watching him. He tried to brush it off, but a man who's lost everything can sense when something dangerous is circling. One late afternoon, as the sky turned amber and the wind softened, Ethan noticed a figure approaching from the hills. Not a soldier, not a government agent, an older rancher with a weathered hat, a limp, and the kind of slow, steady gait that only comes from decades spent on land like this. The man introduced himself as Caleb, a neighbor from 3 miles south. Caleb had heard about the helicopter incident, as he called it, and he came to check on Ethan. Caleb talked about the land, about the facility nearby, about how newcomers were often intimidated to keep them from getting too curious. Ethan listened quietly, absorbing every word. Caleb sensed the worry building in him and reassured him that owning land in Wyoming came with challenges, political, environmental, personal, but also with a sense of freedom unlike anywhere else. Caleb told him that if he wanted to stay, he would have to be strong, patient, and steadfast. Hearing that from a man who had survived droughts, blizzards, and generations of change made Ethan feel a flicker of strength inside. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could build again. But 2 nights later, everything changed. It was close to midnight when Ethan woke to a strange, rhythmic hum. He stepped outside, cold air biting his skin, and saw faint red lights in the distance, moving slowly, deliberately. He felt the same dread he had felt the day the helicopter landed. He watched the lights disappear behind the ridge, silently counting the seconds until the hum faded. The next morning, he found something in the dirt near his fencing line, a metal marker, unfamiliar and unmistakably official. It had numbers engraved into it. His heartbeat quickened as he picked it up, recognizing it from images he had seen in land dispute forums. It was a boundary marker, but not one placed by him or his surveyor. Someone had moved the line. Someone had shifted the boundary into his land. Someone was telling him, silently but clearly, that he needed to leave. Ethan felt something break inside him, not fear, but resolve. He had lost too much to walk away again. He had come here to reclaim his life, and he wasn't leaving without a fight. For the next week, Ethan documented everything: photos, dates, measurements. Caleb advised him, guided him, helped him understand the legal maze ahead. The fear gradually shifted into determination. Ethan filed complaints, contacted the county, and pushed back with every ounce of strength he had left. And slowly, things began to turn. The truth eventually came out: a contractor working for the nearby facility had mistakenly, perhaps carelessly, marked land that wasn't theirs. Once confronted officially, their tone changed dramatically. There were apologies, formal letters, and clarifications. The helicopter stopped coming. The vehicle stopped tracking through his property. A new boundary marker was placed, correctly this time. Ethan stood beside the new marker on a quiet morning, the sun rising behind him, the land stretching peacefully in every direction. He finally felt like the ground beneath him was truly his. But what mattered more was the change inside him. For the first time since losing everything, he felt steady. He felt capable. He felt like a man who had fought to reclaim his future, and won. He finished the fence in the late weeks of autumn. Caleb visited often, bringing advice, tools, and stories. Ethan built his cabin slowly, beam by beam, and each piece felt like he was repairing a part of himself. The land became home. Not because it was perfect, but because he had earned it. Near winter, on a cold serene evening, Ethan stood on his porch and watched the last rays of sunlight fade behind the mountains. He remembered the helicopter, the fear, the doubt, the nights he thought he would have to give up again. And he realized something: the land had tested him.